Hello. Welcome to Socrates in the City. Did you know that you were at a Socrates in the City event? Did you care? Be honest. You didn't care. This is an exciting evening because Mr. Dick Cavett is going to be here. Yeah. I don't know about you, but I get very excited when I think about Dick. And if he weren't caught in traffic on 44th Street and 6th Avenue, I'd be in a great mood right now. I know, you're wondering, is he kidding? Is he kidding? I'm not. I'm kidding. He's back here. He's right back here. I'm thrilled that he consented to come again to Socrates in the City. He's been here a bunch of times, but every time it's so awful that I know he won't come back. But he comes back again and again and again. It really is a thrill for me that you're here and that he's here. And let me say this: tonight's a particularly special evening because of the tree lighting, don't you think? Gosh. I was actually worried that none of you would get here because of the traffic, so thank you for planning ahead and taking the subway or whatever you did to get here. Thank you. And if you're late, I hate you. Did you hear that this is the last year that they're going to do that? De Blasio is shutting that down. Did you hear about that? Yeah. What were his words? I wrote it down. He said, he wants to put an end to the murder of these innocent giants. Those were his words. Yeah, he's shutting it all down, folks. Well, in this case, I mean, he has a point, just not on that subject. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Anyway, look, it's a dream come true for me to interview a legend. I think of Dick as a legend along the lines of, I don't know, Johnny Appleseed, Pecos Bill, that level of legend. But it's true. To get to talk to him, he's a TV legend. He's an icon. He is certainly, for me, a friend, I'm glad to say at this point, a friend, an idol, a friend. And I just found out, this is going to freak you out, He's my biological father. Yeah. But he everywhere he goes, he's getting awards, and this is important. He got an award from the Abingdon Theater. There's a bunch of folks here from the Abingdon Theater, right? Thank you for coming. Dick starred in a play, Hellman v. McCarthy, which tells the really beautiful, painful, please, the beautiful, painful story of the feud between Lillian Hellman and Mary McCarthy. Incredible. And in this play, Dick played himself. Just so you understand the level of greatness and legend we're now talking about. He gets to play. He doesn't even have to do anything except pretend he's 34 years younger. You know, that was the role, basically. So he gets to play himself. And the only one I can think of that I know of whoever got to play himself was like Babe Ruth, I think, in the Pride of the Yankees. You remember that? He got to play. But Dick is at this level. He gets to play himself. Everywhere he goes, he gets awards. And so anyway, the Abingdon Theater gave him this wonderful award. It was a wonderful event. And for me, the highlight of it was they got someone to sing a song, a tribute to Dick. And I thought, I wonder if we can get that woman to come here and to sing that wonderful song. And we couldn't. We couldn't. And and then at one point I thought, I'll find someone to sing, and I rewrote the lyrics rather dramatically. So I had the lyrics ready to go, but we couldn't get anybody to sing it. We couldn't even get a piano, unfortunately. And I wish we'd been able to find a piano. But I would have sung it myself if we could. But then you need to get a piano player. And you know that's not going to happen. You know what I'm saying? It's just not going to happen. But let me be honest with you. If it were to happen, it would probably go something like this. Not exactly like this, but something like this, roughly. He's talked with Groucho and Lucille Ball, with Evel Knievel and Simon Wiesenthal. He's delightful, He's the lovely, he's Dick Cavett. Thank you. He's schmoozed with Bob Hope and with Mel Torme, with William F. Buckley, and with Bob Goulet. He's delightful, he's the lovely, he's Dick Cavett. He has interviewed Ingmar Bergman and Alfred Hitchcock and David Lean, not to mention Truman Capote and Orson Welles and Orson Bean. He had Hepburn and ABBA and Michael Caine and George McGovern and Mickey Spillane. He's delightful, he's the lovely, he's Dick Cavett. And that guy who died from the heart attack, and Woody Allen and Roberta Flack. He's delightful, he's the lovely, he's Dick Cavett. You could hear Jacques Cousteau and Marcel Marceau on his show, and John and Yoko. And oh my, how he got dissed when he landed on Nixon's enemies list. So I ask you, friends, what's not to like? He's had Bella Abzug and Dick Van Dyke. He's delightful, he's the lovely, he's delirious, he's a darling, he's a doozy, he's deluxe, he's adorable, he's Dick Cavett. And he is, and he is, and he is, thank you. I don't know where we got this guy. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dick Cavett. He's really here. He's really here.
He was,
Yeah. I know. They thought I was fooling.
Hey, and thanks. Hi, this is Bob. Join the Peace Corps Hope. Thank you, Eric. I cried. And all I could think of is, I'm going to get a nasty letter from G. Gordon Liddy saying you didn't mention him in the song.
He was
I don't think you did.
He was in a previous draft, actually.
Anyway, the trick is to get on stage before the applause ends, and I think we did.
We did it.
Shall I sit here?
Ladies and gentlemen, Dick Cavett.
Oh.
Yeah. You made it. You beat the traffic.
Yeah, boy. There's no traffic in this part of town because of the demonstrations that are going on downtown. On the night of the Christmas tree, isn't that?
Oh, there are demonstrations.
Wonderful, yeah. Oh,
in New York.
Plenty, yeah.
I was not aware of that.
They're demonstrating against you and me. That's what I mean. It's funny stuff.
Well, Dick, my first question is, how can we get this marvelous product?
How can we what?
The book.
Oh.
Is it out there? Are they selling it out there?
I hope they're out there. My friend Calvin Trillin, whom I know you all read in The New Yorker, was a classmate of mine, but by 1 year. And every author will sympathize with his long-threatened book that will be called an anthology of authors' atrocity stories about publishers. Someone's written a book. Your wife probably put you through the years, and then you got good reviews, and then no.
Well, the book, there's so much in this book. It's like the last one. It's a collection of, for those of you who don't know, Dick writes a column. Why do they call it a blog?
I don't know.
It's a column.
It's an ugly word.
Yeah.
And column is too, for the way some people write them. But I don't know, because it isn't in a column online, is it? Let's think of a better term.
Isn't it?
How about mini masterpiece?
Oh, my goodness. Not even that many. Wonderful. Okay, we'll stick with that. But so it's a collection of columns, And they are, gosh, they're wonderful. So I thought, let me just start with the first one. I was, when I went through it, I thought, it's so beautiful. The first 2 lines in the book, you criticize Humphrey Bogart for getting the Shakespearean quote wrong. And I thought that is just so like you. And I hope he can take that criticism.
That didn't take any nerve. He's dead.
He didn't. It's.
I think.
What?
I once saw Bogart playing. I was 12 years old, I think. Hollywood, in a cab with my father, and an MG convertible, as we were stopped at a light here, was faced this way, stopped here. And there was Bogey. And I don't think I'd ever seen that huge a star before in my life. And I can still feel the impact. And a bit of trivia. On the hood, B&B in nice little ceramic cubes. And years later, I told Lauren Bacall this story on the show, and I said, I can't figure out why it said B&B. I knew one of them would be Bogart. And then I said, and the gods touched me, could it have been Betty and Bogey? And she said, you're so goddamn smart. Did anyone hear that over there? Well, you know, women talk that way. I would never.
Part of what you, I know you've said this a couple of times. You said this on Larry King when Elizabeth Taylor died, and you said it on Charlie Rose about 3 years ago. You referred to the stars of that era, whatever that era is before this era, as redwoods.
Yes, you know why I did that? This will resemble a plug almost. I'm sorry, Eric, but
it depends for what. Don't apologize. If it's a good product, plug away. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for. There are 5 box sets of the Cavett shows out on, and they're available in Amazon. But this isn't a plug. And I think I've forgotten how much they are. I think I get about $4 if you run out and buy one. But one of them is called Hollywood Greats, and I was on a radio show. And I said, look at this. I'm just looking at the box now. Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, Fred Astaire, Groucho Marx, Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, Kirk Douglas, Frank Capra, and Marlon Brando, and Robert Mitchum. And it occurred to me then, he said, or I said, who are their counterparts today? It's as if these were redwoods. And now we have elm trees. Now that's unforgivable because we have many great actors and stars. But there is something larger about those people somehow. I don't know what it is.
We've got to figure it out.
That we could spend the rest of the evening working on that.
Do you think they didn't allow as much access? I mean, I was trying to figure out what it was myself.
Yeah, I don't know. Bette Davis addressed this question on a show of mine and said, you know, they say you should just be realistic and remind people of people they know on the screen. But she said, I like a little bigness, a little bigger than life. And because Bette Davis said it in that great voice and inflection, the audience applauded. You don't have to. That was a night, oh, you've heard this, I'm sorry. But it was going so well. We had Bette Davis for 90 minutes. She had a lot of lifting done, temporary, and yellow glasses, and she looked fabulous. Yeah, there was temporary lifting. I had it in Forrest Gump, but that's another story. And I thought, I'm sitting here with Bette Davis. How did I get so lucky? Betty, why did you do this tonight? You don't like this sort of thing. And she said, well, you're a gentleman, Richard. And I know that I'm in good hands. And I said, so how'd you lose your virginity, Betty?
Right. Yeah. I've seen that.
And the whole point is it's on that box of DVDs called Hollywood Greats.
Right. Will you be signing those DVDs tonight?
Oh, I don't know if there are any DVDs here tonight.
They're not, but I'm just wondering if you're going to be signing them.
Well, if you will all
maybe
leave
you've brought
your
a box
name.
from home.
Everyone writes your name on a piece of paper.
Well, okay. So yes, the columns are delightful, and I guess I wanted to ask you. This is sort of inside baseball, since I'm a writer. How did it happen that the Times approached you and said, "Would you like to write a column?" Because you've written comedy for all the greats, so you're a writer, but you're thought of as a comedy writer. You wrote those 2 books with Christopher Porterfield, sort of talking about your life. But the idea of writing a column for the Times today, I guess, what did it start, 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
At least, yeah.
Who came up with that idea? How did that happen?
You know, I wish I could take credit for it or give somebody else credit for it. All I remember that, as we say in the trade, it came over the transom. Somebody said, "You've had offers for this and that, and the Times thinks you might want to write a column." And I thought, oh, that scared me. Gave me a chill just now. And they want 2 a week. But in fact, my immediate reaction to that, I confess, was that's easy. I write fast. I always upset the older writers on the comedy shows, on the Tonight Show staffs that I was on, because I wrote my stuff and got it in before they were half finished.
Yeah, we hate people like you.
I learned not to do that.
In a good way, yeah.
Please. I said, okay, I'll do it. And I wrote 2 that week, and I wrote 2 easily the next week. And then I wrote the first one for the 3rd week, and I thought, that's it, I'm out, I've finished. I have nothing more to say. I wrote Basil Rathbone's Ghost Story column, and I couldn't think of anything else that had happened in my life. Now, hundreds of columns later, I'm still empty. I'm working on one about Mike Nichols. God, we've lost a lot of good people this year.
Now's not a good time to bring up that Dick Cheney's still alive. So I won't.
I was debating backstage whether I could get that past you tonight on here myself.
You could.
I'm on HuffPost Live, immortalized in a little squib from a show I did on there. David Frost had just died, and it says, Cavett asked about death of David Frost. Why is it never Dick Cheney? And thank you,
his
Eric.
children are all here, by the way, so be careful. We're going to stop right there. That's enough.
I'm glad for them.
Where was we?
People are going to wonder when you're telling the truth.
So I'm lying now. So they said to you, would you like to write something? And then you said, what? No, now I only want to do it once a month. How did it? Because you do it about what, every 3 weeks or something like that?
It dribbled down to finally doing one every 2 weeks. I don't know who these geniuses are who write a column every day, mostly in the sports world. But there are people who turn out a column a day. There was a drunk on the New York Post who used to write columns on TV every day, except the ones where it said, is ill. And you knew that he was face down on a sidewalk somewhere. But, yeah.
Is it Murray Kempton?
What?
Just kidding.
Who? I never know when you're telling the truth.
All right, so that's some other drunk. Okay, well, whatever. It doesn't matter.
It matters
no,
not.
I have no idea. Well, but so you were allowed to write it basically as often as you want, and that's, I'm assuming, because it's online. If it were in the paper, you'd need to stick to a schedule.
I suppose so, yeah. And also, it's amazing how many people say, I never see your column. I heard you on Mark Simone, and he said, you got to read Dick's column, it's great. And I look through the paper, and I never find it. And I'm saying, do you know the 6-letter word online? No. Sometimes.
Okay, so you can write it as often as you want. And whose idea was it to collect them and put them in books? Whose idea was that?
Someone at Holt, my publisher, someone obviously very tasteful and astute.
Not in marketing.
Well, they had a choice of printing me or Bill Buckley's old columns, and I guess they decided to do me. Buckley was a piece of work. Did I write over something you said?
No.
Oh.
I wanted to ask you
I will.
actually about Buckley. He's on my list, which I think I left in the green room. You had him on a number of times, did you not?
Yes,
you
I
were
did.
friends. I believe you swam together at one point.
Eric, please.
Sorry. These are adults.
Eric.
Yeah.
We swam together once, yes.
Really?
We were pulled through the water. Bill Buckley, his wonderful wife, Pat, my late wife, and I, and somebody I've forgotten who had hold of my ankles, were pulled through the water by a gift I'd been given of a thing that pulls you through the water with a motor on it. And I thought...
Was it a boat?
Well,
What do you call something that pulls you through the water, Dick?
it was an engine with a back thing on it. And
with a back thing on it. You should have said that.
It was made by the Back Thing Company, in fact. And if you're going to pick apart this story,
right. Well, we're just dying to know what it was. I want one, really.
I think it was called a putt-putt.
All right.
That sounds
that
realistic.
clears it up, doesn't it? It was a putt-putt.
Let's say it was.
It was a putt-putt, sure.
But my first encounter with Bill Buckley was sophomore English class at Yale. And Professor Cecil Y. Lang said, "You might all want to go over to the law school tonight. The man I consider the most dangerous man in the world is lecturing there." And I went over to see the most dangerous man in the world. Who wouldn't? And it was William F. Buckley, Jr. And he was eccentric and strange. And who was it used to do him by going?
Yeah.
Dave
Everybody.
Fry, I think.
Yeah.
And he was very funny, and he had phrases that I hoped I'd remember, like the mental spastics who read the nation.
That was a good impression.
And we Fade to Black. A lot of us remember the name.
Yeah.
Fade to Black. First week of my show, nervous as hell. Daytime, ABC, Bill Buckley, and I was afraid of him. But it was going all right until I said something, I'm not familiar with that, and he said, "You don't seem to be familiar with anything." I naturally thought, "You son of a bitch." This is my first week of doing this show. I'm responsible for 90 minutes of live television. I'm worried, and you scared me, and I just feel awful. And the audience went, "Ooh," when he did that. But I got him back. Want to hear that? I can make it quick.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, Dick. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I hate that about That's the thing with live TV.
know.
A hard break. It's a hard break. We're done.
You know, here you can't say we have a message when it gets rough and then regroup and come
sure,
back.
I can.
But
well, anyway, and we're back. So, Dick, if you would just, you had a Buckley anecdote burbling just beneath the surface. You were
I forgot it.
was going to burst. Oh, my gosh.
On another show, he said, as Oscar Wilde said, hypocrisy is the compliment that vice pays to virtue. And the whole audience went, "What?"
Yeah.
and I went, "What?" But a woman had given me a book of French citations, and I had been reading it a week before, a thing worthy of your miracle book. Days before, I had read that quote in it, and it was not Oscar Wilde, it was La Rochefoucauld.
Yes. I was going to say, was that La Rochefoucauld?
Yeah, I know.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. That's amazing. If you don't know who said the quote, 9 times out of 10, it's La Rochefoucauld.
It's true.
I don't know how that is, but that's true.
Right. He's right behind Shakespeare and just ahead of Dickens.
Yes.
Yeah. And I got Buckley back on.
Oh.
And I happened to bring it up. And I said, "Bill, you're very astringent with your guests in many ways. You like things to be accurate. You challenge them on facts." "Yes." "Where is this going?" And I said, "Well, it's going to you."
Did you say, "You son of a bitch"?
No, I saved that and told his wife to call him that. But
right.
I didn't. So I led him around to it, and I said, "That quote you gave, I think I have it exact. Let's see, l'hypocrisie est un hommage que le vice rend à la vertu. How does that go in English? Oh, yes, hypocrisy and so on. So I knew you'd want to know that, Bill, because I like to go on people's shows and not mislead the audience, and I knew you'd want to. And he said, thank you, I come here to be educated. Not a very great response.
And you were...
Is that for him or me?
And I know that you became... no one. But you were friendly. You were with
very
him
much,
for many years.
He was a lot of fun and very witty, of course, and famous for when some woman, I used to know her names for some crazy reason, who wrote in saying, cancel my subscription to your magazine, Mr. Buckley.
Yes.
And he wrote back, cancel your own damn subscription.
Actually, now I'm going to correct you.
Uh-oh, it wasn't
Because I know
Buckley?
the exact quote. He said, cancel your own GD description, except he spoke it out. Yeah, it was even worse than damn. But
Eric, that's
it,
infinitely better.
But it
Thank
wanted that syllable. As a comedy writer, you know, sometimes just a syllable
and better rhythm.
It has better punch
Own
and rhythm.
GD, yeah, it's
right?
better rhythm. It's so
Anyway.
iambic and trochaic.
In fact, I think Gesundheit. I think they published. This is true. I think they published a collection of his columns with that title. I'm not kidding. Maybe there's somebody here
really?
who works for
Yeah,
National
yeah,
Review
yeah.
Online. They can tell us. I don't know. Speaking of William F. Buckley, I wanted to ask you something that has nothing to do with him.
I think we'd all applaud that
Is
right
that
at
okay?
this point. Yes.
No, this is something I don't think I've ever asked you this before. How was it, Dick, that you transitioned from, you were a writer, you did some stand-up. How did you get on TV? Who suggested it, or were you fighting for that and it finally happened, or did somebody come to you with the idea? I have no idea, and I'd love to know.
That, as you can see, the people who've been to those places that coach you on how to go on television and plug your book tell them to say, is a very good question. You can see them all say it once. I didn't know. I couldn't reconstruct it. I've told the story about gutsily taking a monologue to Jack Pyre and finding him coming from the men's room, and he hired me as a writer after a day or so. But how did I get into talk television? I never wanted it. I mean, I never dreamed of it.
What year was it? 67, 68? When did you get the morning show?
68. 68 in your language. And or your mother's language? Yeah.
Yes, my mother's language.
Mother's a Kraut, a person of German origin. And I did a pilot. Agent called and said, they've got this pilot idea. You have to fly out to California, and it's called The Star and the Story. And the idea was to get a movie star and tell her life in 5 half hours throughout the week. We got the great Van Johnson. He was delightful. Van, you were born and they ploddingly told Van Johnson's life for 5 half-hour episodes. It was sent to ABC, and they hated it. And I was told that someone in the room said, but let's not lose track of that kid who's the host. He might be the one we should try our daytime talk show idea with or on. And that was moi. And I did it, the very first show, scared to death, 90 minutes. How am I going to get through this? How do you do this?
Now, daytime, what time during the day?
It was I'm not actually sure. It's been referred to as my morning show and my midday show. I think it was something like 11:30 to 1.
Because it's such, I can't put myself back to remember what was on in those years. But today, of course, that it's completely different. Late night shows and daytime shows, different audiences. I think it was
Almost
different then as well, but maybe not as different if they
almost
thought of you
everything
for
about
it.
them is
Because you're no Jerry Springer, sir. I'm friends with Jerry Springer, and you're no Jerry Springer.
Who says?
Yeah.
I never aspired to be Jerry Springer, but he is, as people say on talk shows, when they're afraid they might say something bad, He's a dear friend of mine.
Really?
And they never are.
I actually can't think of anyone in the culture. There are a lot of people in the culture that I think are bad influences. I can't think of anyone worse than Jerry Springer. I just had to get that out. So that's why I always say, when you're smiling. But okay, so you did.
Sure.
How long did you do the daytime show for?
ABC never promoted it. Protests came from people who accidentally discovered it in the middle of their day, mostly housewives.
Yeah.
I used to see letters copy to me, to ABC, why the hell don't you promote this show? I only found it by accident. I hate to think of losing it. And the audience began to build without any help from the network. And then it ended. And then I was sitting in a theater in London, and a woman in the row behind me tapped my shoulder and said, "Congratulations." And I thought she meant for getting tickets to this hit play in London. And I said, "Well, you mean something else?" And she said, "Well, you're replacing Joey Bishop." Joey Bishop was the late night host then on ABC. And in fact, I was. No one had been polite enough to tell me. And obviously, if it hadn't been for that woman, I never would have done it.
And what happened to Joey?
Joey, as someone, Woody Allen.
Other than the Dean Martin roast that he used to do. I don't remember what happened to him.
He was a very good comic, marvelous stand-up comic, with a slow face and a fast mind. Interesting combination. And not a very nice man. In fact, two writers, I worked for him for a week in the awkward interval between Jack Parr and Johnny Carson when everybody in show business hosted The Tonight Show for a week.
There's a column about that in your book.
Right. It was called, I called it the stock company period, where everybody from Mort Sahl to Groucho to one of the Gabors to Donald O'Connor hosted The Tonight Show. Fat Jack Leonard, everybody.
Fat Jack Leonard?
Oh, yes.
How many people here remember Fat Jack Leonard? I'm just checking.
Yeah. Okay, then I feel free to tell this.
Yes.
I thought he was hilarious. He was a lovely man. He never came to the show without bringing cufflinks or tie clips or presents for people on the staff. And just a nice guy, a so-called insult comedian or whatever. But he was so nice, and he had certain stock lines, and I wanted to hear them every time, and he did them every time. One of them was, "Why don't you put your glasses on backwards and walk into yourself?" And
I didn't think I was going to get a Fat Jackie Leonard impression tonight or at any point in the rest of my life. So thank you for that.
You haven't learned to aim high.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true. All things are possible.
But another time, so I thought, how do I write for him? He's a guest host for a week. And Telstar, what a huge word that was back then. The first big satellite had gone up that day. And I gave him a line I thought he probably wouldn't use. And at the end of his monologue, I said, "You might want to close with this line. There's going to be a party after the show, and then we're going to all go up on the roof and shoot down Telstar." This killed the audience. I don't know why. And the only other thing I can remember giving him was, why don't I give him a fresh version of some of his stock lines? And I gave him, "Why don't you walk into a parking meter and violate yourself?"
That's yours? That's yours.
Well,
that's
his
his.
now.
That's excellent. Except today they don't have that the thing that says
violation. I know, but some old folks laugh.
Yes. Yes. Well, okay, and I want to ask you also. You have a tremendous theater background. You've always been interested. I'm guessing there are a lot of people here who know that, and a lot of people here who have no idea about that. I mean, you did Rocky Horror. You've done a few things, but you're a man of the theater, and you have been since Yale, pretty much, no?
Well, actually, since Nebraska.
Wow.
By some anomaly.
You know, Nebraska's not a time, by the way.
Oh.
You really...
Well,
that I know of.
Yeah. Why don't you walk into a parking meter? In Nebraska, in 8th grade, I had Lula B. Moore. Lula B. Moore was a lovely ancient vierge who taught Miss Moore acting. And there was the Drama 2 special class. And one day I was called out of class to the principal's office because out of nowhere, suddenly an Equity Summer Theater in a barn like the oldest summer stock theater, huge dairy barn, opened and lasted for several seasons. New York actors got off the train in Nebraska and couldn't figure out what had happened to them because they couldn't see any tall buildings and they could see the sky forever. And they wanted a young man who might be able to do an English accent. And Miss Moore had discovered that I could, and I starred with a company of brilliant actors in The Winslow Boy.
Ah. How old were you?
I was, this was 3 years ago.
14. Yeah. You were, I think I remember this. You were like 14.
Yeah, I was. I was whatever you are in junior high is what I was, yeah. And
there's a good joke there. I just couldn't come up with it.
Well,
whatever you were in junior high.
I think Ronnie is 14 in the play.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember standing in the wings opening night, and I was the first one to enter alone. And I thought, I can't do this. Some supernatural power has got to be invoked to get me through this evening. I have every third line in this play. But I did get through it. I loved doing it. And that was my first acting. Then I did plays at Yale. And then in New York.
Wait, did you, before that, did you ever have the desire to act? Was this just something they sprang on you?
I took the drama class in junior high thinking I might want to be an actor, probably in Lincoln for the rest of my life in the Hayloft Summer Theater. Because I never dreamed of going, I dreamed of going east, but I never thought it could be a reality. And when a family friend, my parents have all been school teachers, from Omaha, had a fellowship to Yale, said Dick should apply to Yale. This is his senior year. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I probably didn't know what apply to Yale meant. But I did, and the envelope came, and I thought, well, I know the first words will be, "We regret." It was a summer day. I was home alone, opened the thing. Congratulations, you will be in the class of 1958. And I remember it was, I don't know if epiphany is the right word, but Eric will tell you. I thought...
It's not, but go ahead. They won't know the difference. Go ahead.
They won't know, right? This spells the rest of my life in some way. Had it said "we regret,"
yes,
you would have looked silly talking to an empty chair tonight.
I can look silly right now, even though you're here. I didn't mention this earlier, but we met the day that I graduated from Yale. I was the class day speaker, and the celebrity speaker was Dick Cavett.
Little Dickie Cavett
and
from Lincoln,
you were
Nebraska.
48 years old at the time.
Good God.
And the next year, you turned 49.
If you turn for...
Do you remember that? You remember that?
Yes, and if
It's
you turn
just
49,
amazing.
you get 94.
Yeah, right. But you did you do? But you did. You when you were at Yale, you did theater, did you not? Or was that?
I did theater, as it's
Theater?
sometimes called in the Midwest.
Yeah.
It always drove me crazy when people said theater. I did, but freshman year I didn't. My parents reminded me that when I got on the train, the Challenger, I think it was, in Lincoln's railway station, the night I left home for Yale, that I had said, "What if I can't do the work?" And my dad said, "You'll be all right." But I didn't know that he knew that. And so, freshman year, I was scared ordureless. I just didn't think that I could.
Ordureless?
Don't let it pass.
O-R-D-U-R-E less.
I was.
That's a great word.
I was trying to be genteel.
You were quite genteel. Nobody knows what you meant by that.
But I thought, I was so scared that to the hatred it instilled in my roommates, if a philosophy paper was assigned freshman year on can we isolate a given element in knowledge, whatever the hell that means, I went home and wrote that paper without even going to the dining hall for lunch and typed it clean and paper clipped it and put it in my drawer so it would be ready 8 days later when it was due. And that's how I was freshman year. I was afraid I'd flunk out. But as luck would have it, my Bronxville anti-Semitic roommate flunked out for me. But I didn't dare do a play because I would talk to guys who were in plays and they say, God, we were up till 4 a.m. with a lighting rehearsal and I got classes at 8 and oh. But after that, I made the dean's list that year and I never did again, but I was in a lot of shows. Cyrano, The Great Gatsby, The Crucible, God knows what all.
Did you know before you went to Yale that you wanted to be in show business?
Yeah. I didn't want to be in anything else. My poor father, fearful of my ever making a dollar, and he was obsessed with money, as were almost all his contemporary teacher friends who had been through the Depression. He taught school. I remember he was telling me he got the job, desperate for a job, teaching English in Comstock, Nebraska. I'm sure a lot of you have been there.
Hold your applause.
For $600 a year. It raised to $700 the next year. And ever and anon, he would say, your mother and I would have to decide whether we could spend a dime for a movie or we should buy bread or lettuce or something with it. So he was always, so he had said, you know where they got a great dental school at the University of Nebraska, and they have a pretty good law school, and you got to think about, this show business stuff, it's pretty dicey, But I knew I was never going to be a dentist. Well, I love dentists, I don't mean that. But I just knew that Yale, I knew from talking this benefactor, this teacher, Frank Rice, who got me into Yale, got me to apply and I got in, had said, the great thing about New Haven is not the weather, but the Schubert Theater. What's that? It's what's called a tryout theater. All the Broadway shows on their way to New York start at the Schubert, almost all. Some in Boston, then the Schubert. And for the next 4 years, I saw everybody in the golden age, what I think of as the last of the golden age of American theater. The Luntz and Noel Coward and Frederick March and just Helen Hayes and Judith Anderson, all these legends of my life from Theater Arts magazine. And there I was looking at them with nothing but air between me and them. And I went backstage frequently and walked into their dressing rooms.
Okay, hold on a second. Now, hold on right there. You have a knack, a thing for being backstage. So if anybody's ever wondering where you are, if they can't find you, you're backstage someplace, typically,
backstage.
Right? And
look in Rex Harrison's dressing room. He's probably in there. I was.
When did that start, and what gave you the sense, the chutzpah, to think that you could get backstage? Because, I was a student at Yale, and I wasn't wandering around backstage at the Schubert. I don't know. What put that idea into your head?
I don't know that it was an idea. It seemed more like a compulsion. I just thought, here I go, backstage.
You just couldn't help yourself.
No, my legs were taking me there, and
the heart wants what it wants, right? You just went, right?
Yeah. A little voice was saying, "Sure,
Who
you're not going to walk into Judy Holliday's dressing room, are you? Oops, here's her door." And there I was, and hello, and we talked. I walked into Judy Garland's dressing room at the Palace in New York while I was at Yale.
You just walked into it.
Well, I went backstage to see if I could get in, and I said to the guy, I'm a friend of Judy's, and he said, okay. And
That's different.
and if you're backstage and there's a backstage doorman, say, how's it going, Pop? He's always called Pop, and so he thinks you're supposed to be there. And then I went down a little hall, and it was dark. This is the Radio City Music Hall. No, it wasn't. It was the Palace. Better. The Palace Theater, in the lyric of one of her songs. And a figure in a house coat was walking ahead of me. And it was a little broader than I thought Judy Garland was, so I didn't think it was Judy Garland. But it was. And I followed her into her dressing room. And she wheeled about, and Margaret Whiting, the singer, was in there. And her face was kind of a pudding.
Margaret Whiting's or Judy's?
Huh?
Margaret Whiting's or Judy's?
No, Judy, Miss Judy. She had taken all her splendid makeup off, and she had just come. I was probably the only straight man in her audience at the Palace that night.
And you're not that straight. Let's be honest, it's a New York crowd. It's
Okay, well, this is the night it comes out.
right.
But I spoke to her, and she kept trying to figure out who I was, and and I will admit that my voice has always been distinctive, even when I was a kid. I have this feeling at puberty it went up, because I had always had a low voice, and if I talked from the back of a room that other people were talking in, everybody turned around when I said something, and it was strange for me. So my voice seemed to get me in. People seemed to be intrigued by it. But at one point, I had stayed just a touch too long, perhaps, and she said, what is this, an interview? The bitch.
Yes, exactly.
And I excused myself. And years later,
Yes.
on television, I was able to say, I don't know anything else to say about my next guest except Miss Judy Garland. And bang, and she came out.
You didn't remind her of this incident.
I should have. I wonder if I did. I don't know.
Well, you reminded all the other greats of when you'd met them years earlier.
I often did, yeah. But this sounds strange. But if you want to know where to meet famous people when you were born when I was, and remember World War II, Lincoln, Nebraska was the place to be. I met Basil Rathbone, Bob Hope, Spike Jones, Charles Lawton, Charles Boyer, Cedric Hardwick, Agnes Moorehead, Dane Clark, Henry Fonda, all came to do shows in Lincoln. But I couldn't believe that Bob Hope was going to be in Lincoln. And the ad said Bob Hope, and I quickly looked for that dreadful line, a film, and found not a film, I thought, but I couldn't remember. My friend Lyle Burke and I went, we got good seats, and 5 vaudeville acts came on, and the curtain went down, and I didn't know from intermission. We thought it was over. Luckily, we came back, and the voice said, and now the star of our show, Bob Hope. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. And Bob Hope glided onto the stage. And Lyle said, my God, there he is. And I just got the chills now. Ran around backstage. Hope came down the stairs at the end. I said, fine show, Bob. He said, hey, thanks, son. And I told all my friends the next day about chatting with Bob Hope the night before. And years later, on a Kinney of this, I think it was my days, I run around to look in the wings to see if Bob Hope actually showed up, because he was supposed to be my next guest. And there he was. And he came on to Thanks for the Memory, of course. I told him this story. And I said, fine show, Bob. And thanks, son. He said, hey, was that you? What a man.
In your book, it's a collection of, I would say, spectacular celebrity anecdotes and stories with childhood stories, which are almost all of them. I think all of them. There's a beautiful innocence to them. Most people don't know that side of you. You're very sweet, innocent. But when you're not being nasty or putting people down, you're very sweet.
Yeah.
And
It's that kind of innocence.
I thought, but you ever think about that? Do you feel that American life is that American life is different? And if so, why? What was it about that time? Because those columns, and I know all these people will read them because they're going to buy the book and get you to sign it later. Obviously, that's why they're here.
Right.
But
don't run out now.
But don't leave now. But honestly, there's a beautiful innocence in them. What do you think of that?
There's also guilt, isn't there? It was a different time. I don't know that it was a better time, except we didn't have a lot of the horrors that we have now, it seemed. But yeah, I grew up in a cliched neighborhood street with elm trees, and people had dogs, and everybody did, it seemed, and you left your house open when you went on vacation for 2 weeks, and neighbors came in and watered the plants, and you didn't lock up. And surely that's a different world. I don't know why it's so different now. But there's also guilt in the fact that I really realized there are 2 pieces in the book in which I commit crimes that were punishable had it I
Look,
not
that
lucked
guy
out.
needed killing. I read the story. And you know what? Let it go. We're better off without him.
You promised not to bring that
Well,
up.
they're going to read it in the book anyway. But
Well, she didn't suffer.
yeah, well,
Just,
just leave it
anything
at that.
you say, somebody believes it.
just leave it at that.
Okay,
Careful.
okay, let that pass.
Careful. Well, okay, here's a question that 3 years ago, Charlie Rose asked of you. I'm typically not a fan of his way of questioning. He usually says things like, "Da-da-da-da-da is what?" But he asked you a question 3 years ago when you came out with your last... ringing any bells? When you came out with your last collection about how TV has changed, and what was it? Well, he asked 2 questions. I think I've asked you the first question another time. Do you ever think now that you'd like to do a show, something like the show that you did and that we've all admired you on? Does that go through your head? And what's different about TV today? What was it? I mean, so many people rave about your show. Your show was unique. Notice I didn't modify unique. You can't modify it.
Thank you for that.
But so many people say there was nothing like your show, and I think that's true. But the question is, part of that has to do with you. There's not another you, and you bring a number of gifts. But there was something, it seems to me, about TV then, perhaps, that can't be duplicated now. Or would you agree with that? Do you think that things are it's possible?
Disassembling it, it's different now. Late night talk shows have evolved somehow. And in fact, by the way, there was an article in the New Yorker, must be a year and a half ago now, that I discovered by sheer shock and accident, Dick Cavett in Late Night Television, a piece, that was not the title, that was the subtitle. And I learned in that article about how it's changed, that late night talk, as distinct from when it was Jack Paar and Johnny Carson, is not a cash cow anymore. It may be on the way out before too long. And that the stunning fact was that because there were so few things in those days, we were just out of the CBS, NBC, ABC, that was your choice, 3 channels time. I had, in the time that I was canceled finally, and for the last time by ABC, more viewers than Letterman or Leno or anybody else could have in recent years, because it's television is just, you can see anything you want. That's a startling fact to me. And then there's the other thing which people say to me, you ever notice nobody gets more than 7 minutes now on a talk show? And I used to do 90 minutes and find it much easier than doing 7 minutes. I didn't always do 90 minutes, obviously, but all those shows where I had one guest were a lark. I loved it. It could loosen the guest up if they were nervous, and then see them get better, and then see them get more comfortable, and then have them say afterwards, how you got me to talk about that one thing I'll never know. You made me too comfortable. But do you watch TV for different reasons now? I don't know. I don't watch anything on television regularly. I mean, religiously. Since I know all the talk show people, I watch them frequently. But
well, the breadth of guests that you had, obviously, in that song earlier, I had to go through, in order to get all those rhymes, I had to go through every one of your guests. And I couldn't get over the breadth. I mean, from Evel Knievel to William F. Buckley and Simon Wiesenthal. I mean, on and on. I was marveling and marveling and marveling at how you would go from showbiz personality to some kind of, cultural genius. It doesn't seem to me that we have folks like that, except for Charlie Rose. But Charlie Rose doesn't do comedy or shtick. I mean, it's very serious.
Right. Yeah.
And you did both. And I think that's what I love most about your show and about you, is that you've got that breadth of interest. I mean, that you're as happy talking to Groucho about nothing or anything as talking to somebody really serious. That seems to me to have gone out of TV.
Well, like you, is it as you? Like you, I'm stunned at my guest list when I look back at it. My God, Daniel Ellsberg, I'd forgotten I had him.
Yeah.
The Murderer, Captain Jeffrey McDonald.
I thought you meant Norman Mailer.
No.
Is he here? No.
Check carefully. The Mafia Don, Columbo.
Oh, I didn't know you had him.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exactly the rhyme I was looking for. I can't believe it. Really?
What would you rhyme with Columbo? Don't be a
Cousteau.
Dumbo.
Cousteau, Marcel Marceau.
Oh, that was a good triple rhyme.
Dang. I'm furious that I missed that.
Did you not have Jacques-Yves Cousteau in your lyric?
I did, yeah.
Here's a thing for language people only, and the rest will be bored stiff by it. He told me on a show about an island they had discovered in the Caribbean, and he said, watch for it, here it comes, it was a whale graveyard. They'd never seen anything like it, one whole side of this island. And he said, the littoral is literally littered with their bones.
Now, wait a minute, because we're not going to have transcripts of this, so say that, the L-I-T-T-O-R-A-L, the littoral.
Yeah, the littoral.
Is literally littered with their bones.
He had no idea that he had said anything remarkable.
That's the funniest part.
That's the best thing.
Holy cow.
God, I love that. I don't know why.
And you did have Marcel Marceau on. Obviously, it was a talk show, so he didn't mime his way through it.
No, I did have him on, but I'm keeping it quiet. My wife just went, oh, no. That's very encouraging.
But how does that work? I mean, the fact that they gave you the freedom to talk to people who were, I don't remember, when was your ABC show on? That wasn't late night, was it? Or it was, actually. It was 11 or 11:30 opposite Carson.
Strangely enough, The Tonight Show, when I first heard of it and watched Jack Parr on it, started at 11:15. Isn't that a forgotten fact? Jack so hated that 15 minutes because it was only carried by half of the affiliates. So he blew his monologue on half the country. He protested, and finally they dropped it and started at 11:30. But yeah, I did 11:30 to 1, the traditional one, opposite Johnny, and at another point, among Johnny, myself, and Merv Griffin. So you could switch all around and see different types of shows. But when I look at that guest list, I've forgotten so many. This is kind of interesting. Well, why don't you be the judge? I was sitting there beside Johnny Carson one of the times I was canceled, and Johnny would always, perhaps as a fellow Nebraskan, have me on after a cancel. You want to come on Monday, Richard? Yeah. And
That's true. He would have you, right?
Yeah, and I would go on the Tonight Show. He brought me out first, even though he had other illustrious guests. And he was so easy with me that his staff would say, I wish you were on every week. He's a different man when you're on. Somebody pointed out Johnny only leans back in the back of his chair when Cavett is on. We had a great friendship. But he would say, if this next one doesn't work, it's Armed Forces Radio for Richard. You know.
He would, but you really were friends. I mean,
Yeah.
It's remarkable. It's one thing to meet the greats, but to be friends with Johnny Carson, of all the opaque personalities,
Yeah,
he
had
was
few
not somebody
friends.
that made a lot of friends, or are we getting that wrong?
No, Johnny was as awkward socially as almost
Richard Nixon.
No. Nixon took the prize for that and criminality. But, you can applaud.
There's a lot of Nixon. You got to be careful. A lot of Nixon fans here. You got to be careful what you say.
But John, well, what we were talking about, Johnny said one night, waving to Doc to bring the band down a little during a commercial break, because he liked them to play loud so he wouldn't have to talk to the guests during the breaks. Not a bad idea, by the way. You blow stuff that way. Richard, do you ever forget who you had on? And I said, this is during the 12:30 long break so we could talk. Well, sure, there are so many. And he said, no, I mean that night. And he was not literally, but figuratively sweating a little. And I saw that he was worried. And I said, well, I suppose. And he said, well, the reason I asked, I went home the other night. He had an Irish doorman he had told me about. And he said, my doorman said, so who do you have on the show tonight, Mr. Carson? And I said, well, we had the usual four. We had, Jesus. And he said, I couldn't think of any of the four guests. It was an hour earlier. And I had to go upstairs. I had a drink. I finally came up with J.P. Morgan was one of the guests. But he was worried. He drank a lot when I worked with him. He had a wife on the ledge now and then. He had lots of tension, like a wire about to snap. And he'd be in his dressing room when I took the material down for that night in his underwear shirt, saying these things are killing me, which they did, his Pall Malls, if we want to thank a tobacco company. And pull himself together, come into the wings, hated to have to say hello to the guests beforehand. I knew to always ask him about a card slide or something which relaxed him. And then he'd stand there, stamp out the cigarette, band played, and he'd go out and be the happiest he ever was for, in the latter years, 1 hour a day, formerly 90 minutes. He told me once, Richard, the biggest mistake I ever made was cutting back to an hour. He realized how much he hated it.
That was his decision.
Yeah, he demanded that, and then he was sorry.
And 4 days a week.
But, I made him feel better. I wanted to. And I had something, luckily, to do it with. I said, oh, God, yes, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I said, I came home one night from one of my one-person shows, and people in the apartment said, there was a party or something. They said, hey, Dick, how'd the show go? And I said, fine. They said, who was it? And I said, my God, they sat right there.
Was it somebody I mentioned earlier?
It was an obscure name, so gets me off the hook a little. Lucille Ball.
Oh. Well, no wonder. Yeah. Wow.
I could not bring it into consciousness, but it started the evolving of my theory that I think most actors know and would understand. It's not you out there. You're never you completely, even in a chat show. And the you that does the show stays at the theater. You go home. When you come back, you put that mask on again, and you do it. And the one that went home can't be expected to remember it. Very odd. But
Are you now? These people don't. A lot of these people don't know me, but I'm much taller when I go home. Yeah, 4 or 5 inches at least.
How do you do that?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
My God, man.
It's extraordinary.
That's a side of you I hadn't seen.
Right,
I've seen
right, the tall side.
Well,
it's so frustrating talking to you because all I can think of is that it has to come to an end. You are
Oh, I'm just getting started.
Good.
Come on,
you are as good.
Oh,
yes.
I'm sorry, Eric.
No, please.
You were doing so well. Could I tell one story about a great comedian, and I've always thought everybody must know it. Whenever I write a column or anything, people say, Groucho Marx, tell us about Groucho Marx. Tell more about Groucho Marx. And I've written a lot about Groucho. And I can never quite believe that I met not only Stan Laurel for an afternoon, and there's a piece about that in the book that made people cry.
Have you got a book out?
And
Wow.
And you really know how to hurt a guy. And this is Groucho and the Seance. It's fun to tell. Do some people know what I'm about to say? Somebody did. Well, yeah.
But it's so good.
It's
like
a good one.
Jackie Leonard.
It's better. The boys were in vaudeville, the brothers, the four brothers. And they were huge stars, making $2,000 a week in the Depression, when my father was making 80 cents a day or something. And so people wanted to meet them, and people would come backstage, and a woman came back and said, Mr. Marx, are you interested in the supernatural for any reason? He said, well, I am, in fact. Yeah, I've been reading about Dr. Ryan and some other things. He said, well, there's going to be a seance here in Minneapolis, perhaps, vaudeville tour. Here's the address, but I don't know quite how to say. He said, I know what you're going to say. You know, I'm an idiot on stage, but I can be respectful and be a normal person. And no one would know him because the mustache was painted on then, so nobody knew. But he went. It was in a huge home, and there were black drapes and 1 or 2 candles, and the devoted and the believers were sitting out front reverently, and I think her name was Anna Eva Fay. If not, that was a famous seance trance medium. And she looked, he said, like Margaret Dumont in the Groucho, in the Marx Brothers movie, in her gown. And she stood and said, at a certain point of incantation, I am in touch with the other world. I am in touch with the other world. Does anyone have a question? And a familiar voice said, what is the capital of North Dakota?
Well.
He said, I escaped with my life.
Oh my gosh. We have to have time for you to sign all the books that these fine people are going to purchase any minute.
Oh, we wouldn't want to deprive them.
Before we do that, let me ask a final question.
Shoot.
What's the capital of North Dakota? No, not that question.
I've never wanted to know. Somebody said Bismarck.
Yeah,
so
somebody
right.
was right. You do a lot of things now. You write this column. I know that you're busy. We don't see enough of you, those of us who are here, who know your work. It's just a joy to see you out there. You're as wonderful a guest as you are a host, which is saying tons. And I think the question would be, and in fact is, What would you like to do? You're cursed with so many talents. You could do almost everything. Most people here don't know you were a champion gymnast. That's true. So you've got a few. Other than the pommel horse, what would you like to do? What are the sorts of things you'd like to write? Would you like to write a play? Would you like to be in a play? I'm just curious. Do you think about this, or you just let it ride and you take what comes up?
I've actually thought of calling you at times and saying, what should I do that I haven't done? Because and I promised God I would never use this word, awesome writer. How do we get the young
I'm sorry,
folks
I didn't catch that. What? I wish I can't believe what. Thank you, Dick. And
That's
some of
okay.
my products are also available out there.
Right.
But I'm.
Should we?
I am a writer, but I have no idea what that has to do with what I would think you ought to be doing.
But I think you're a guy who seems to know what he wants to do, and you do phenomenal things, and you do them so well.
Oh, that's a lie, but go ahead. Thank you.
You're not bad looking. I tried to time that for when his mouth was full of water.
That's right.
Let me give you a thing that will make it worth coming tonight.
I dare you. Oh, I don't think you can do it. Go ahead.
I did a show on PBS recently called Dick Cavett's Watergate. Did anyone catch that?
Yes.
Yeah. This sounds immodest, but it's one of the best things I've ever been connected with. It's a brilliant hour about the great unindicted co-conspirator and criminal streak president, Richard Milhouse Nixon, and his criminal vice president. And as Carl Bernstein says on the show, the day after the landslide election, the Nixon tape, which should be, now we're back and we got this great landslide and we can do wonderful things for the country. It's, how can we screw this son of a bitch who didn't promise? And we'll ruin this guy's auto business. Put Tom on that. And so. And this foul-mouthed, wretched personality president who sprang from the womb screaming, "I want to be president," and then blew it, is in this thing. Somebody pointed out, a guy who knew my tapes called and said, "Do you realize how much Watergate you've got? You had all of the baddies on the show." Two people, not myself, put together this wonderful hour. Some people have watched it 2 or 3 times. So go home, not in this sentence, and Dick Cavett's Watergate. You will find it, and you will really love it.
And actually, it is terrific, but it is true that somebody is cutting together a number of shows like that. Is that correct? Dick Cavett.
Some other Dick Cavett Watergates. Yeah, Muhammad Ali, I write about in the book. For a time, I thought he must be my best friend in the world, and did a lot of shows.
We've all thought that, haven't we?
Yeah.
That's just the kind of guy he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. He stayed in my house in Montauk one night, and it was kind of an accident. We were doing a documentary out there, and I went to get his wife from the motel they were checked into and bring her over to stay at the house. So I left him alone in it. My late wife called, phone's picked up, and she says, "Darling," and he says, "This ain't darling." She said, "May I ask?" And he said, "It's only 3-time heavyweight champion of the world, and I'm lying in your bed, and I'm watching your TV." Oh, God. And she said, "Well, Mr. Ali," knowing, "I will put a plaque on that bed," which is more than she ever did for me.
Oh, gosh. Dag nabbit, we've got to stop. Listen, we're going to sneak backstage while they set up the book signing table. There's if you buy a book, there'll be a line snaking back to Broadway and right there and up here, and you get to shake the hand of the man who slept in the same bed as Muhammad Ali. And any questions? Unfortunately not. We've already gone over time. But, but since you were so obnoxious about it, we'll take your question.
Yes. I'd like to know if you ever had the opportunity to interview and what your impressions were of Oscar Levant.
My first impression of Oscar Levant really was that he was dead by the time I did talk shows. And since I'd already had a man die while I was taping the show in front of the audience, I thought bringing Oscar back would be too much. But I met him backstage on the old Par Tonight show the night he said, I just saw a Frank Sinatra movie that was so bad I went out and made a citizen's arrest of the cashier.
That sounds just like Oscar Levant.
Yeah.
It's amazing. In all seriousness, we're out of time. It kills me. I think I'd like to get a TV show just so I could have you on all the time and we could continue this conversation. This, as far as I'm concerned, has been a delight. Thank you, Dick. Thank you. Nothing to say. Gee, you're swell.
Hey, man.
These are your people. Yeah. Thank you.